A coffeehouse, coffee shop, or café is an establishment which primarily serves hot coffee, related coffee beverages, tea, and other hot beverages. Some coffeehouses also serve cold beverages such as iced coffee and iced tea. Many cafés also serve some type of food, such as light snacks, muffins, or pastries. Coffeehouses range from owner-operated small businesses to large multinational corporations. In continental Europe, a café is a traditional type of coffeehouse, but elsewhere the term café may also refer to a tea room, greasy spoon, transport café, or other casual eating and drinking place. A coffeehouse may share some of the same characteristics of a bar or restaurant, but it is different from a cafeteria. Many coffeehouses in the Middle East and in West Asian immigrant districts in the Western world offer shisha-flavored tobacco smoked through a hookah. Espresso bars are a type of coffeehouse that specializes in serving espresso and espresso-based drinks. From a cultural standpoint, coffeehouses largely serve as centers of social interaction. The coffeehouse provides patrons with a place to congregate, talk, read, write, entertain one another, or pass the time, whether individually or in small groups. Since the development of Wi-Fi, coffeehouses with this capability have also become places for patrons to access the internet on their laptops and tablet computers. A coffeehouse can serve as an informal club for its regular members. As early as the 1950s beatnik era and the 1960s folk music scene, coffeehouses have hosted singer-songwriter performances, typically in the evening. History. Coffeehouses in Mecca became a concern as places for political gatherings to the imams who banned them and the drink for Muslims between 1512 and 1524. In 1530, the first coffeehouse was opened in Damascus, and not long after there were many coffeehouses in Cairo. The Ottoman chronicler Ibrahim Pekhevi reports in his writings about the opening of the first coffeehouse in Istanbul. Until the year 962, in the high, God-guarded city of Constantinople, as well as in Ottoman lands generally, coffee and coffeehouses did not exist. About that year, a fellow called Hakam from Aleppo and a wag called Shams from Damascus came to the city. They each opened a large shop in the district called Tahtakale, and began to purvey coffee. Various legends involving the introduction of coffee to Istanbul at Kivahan in the late 15th century circulate in culinary tradition, but with no documentation. The 17th-century French traveller and writer Jean Chardin gave a lively description of the Persian coffeehouse scene. People engage in conversation, for it is that news is communicated, and where those interested in politics criticize the government in all freedom and without being fearful, since the government does not eat what the people say. Innocent games, resembling checkers, hopscotch, and chess, are played. In addition, mullahs, dervishes, and poets take turns telling stories in verse or in prose. The narrations by the mullahs and the dervishes are moral lessons, like our sermons, but it is not considered scandalous not to pay attention to them. No one is forced to give up his game or his conversation because of it. A mullah will stand up in the middle or at one end of the kafeh and begin to preach in a loud voice, or a dervish enters all of a sudden, and chastises the assembled on the vanity of the world and its material goods. It often happens that 2 or 3 people talk at the same time, one on one side, the other on the opposite, and sometimes one will be a preacher and the other a storyteller. Etymology. The most common English spelling, café, is the French, Portuguese and Spanish spelling, and was adopted by English-speaking countries in the late 19th century. As English generally makes little use of diacritical marks, Anglicization includes a tendency to omit them and to place the onus on the readers to remember how it is pronounced, without being given the accents. Thus the spelling spelling café has become very common in English language usage throughout the world, especially for the less formal i.e. greasy spoon variety. The Italian spelling café is also sometimes used in English. In southern England, especially around London in the 1950s, the French pronunciation was often facetiously altered to kaf and spelled ca. The English words coffee and café both descend from the Italian word for coffee, café, first attested as cave in Venice in 1570, and in turn derived from the Arabic kahwa. The Arabic term kahwa originally referred to a type of wine, but after the wine ban by Muhammad, the name was transferred to coffee because of the similar rousing effect it induced. The European awareness of coffee came through Europeans' contact with Turkey, likely via Venetian Ottoman trade relations. The Arabic term was transformed into kahwa, and it spread from there to Europe. The translingual word root café appears in many European languages with various naturalized spellings, including Portuguese, Spanish, and French, German, Polish, Ukrainian, and others. There is another theory that coffee first spread to Europe through Poland and Ukraine, through the contacts with the Ottoman Empire. Europe. In the 17th century, coffee appeared for the first time in Europe outside the Ottoman Empire, and coffee houses were established and quickly became popular. The first coffee houses appeared in Venice in 1629. Due to the traffic between La Serenissima and the Ottomans, the very first one is recorded in 1645. The first coffee house in England was set up in Oxford in 1652 by a Jewish man named Jacob at the Angel in the parish of St. Peter in the east. A building on the same site now houses a café bar called the Grand Café. Oxford's Queen's Lane Coffee House, established in 1654, is also still in existence today. The first coffee house in London was opened in 1652 in St. Michael's Alley, Cornhill. The proprietor was Pasqua Rossaya, the servant of a trader in Turkish goods named Daniel Edwards, who imported the coffee and assisted Rossaya in setting up the establishment in St. Michael's Alley, Cornhill. From 1670 to 1685, the number of London coffee houses began to multiply, and also began to gain political importance due to the popularity as places of debate. By 1675, there were more than 3,000 coffee houses in England. Pasqua Rossaya also established the first coffee house in Paris in 1672 and held a city-wide coffee monopoly until Procopio Cato opened the Café Procope in 1686. This coffee house still exists today and was a major meeting place of the French Enlightenment. Voltaire, Rousseau, and Denis Diderot frequented it, and it is arguably the birthplace of the Encyclopédie, the first modern encyclopedia. In 1667, Kara Hami, a former Ottoman janissary from Constantinople, opened the first coffee shop in Bucharest, in the center of the city, where today lies the main building of the National Bank of Romania. America had its first coffee house in Boston in 1676. The first cafeteria in Vienna was founded in 1683 by a Polish resident, Jerzy Franciszek Kulczycki, who was also the first to serve coffee with milk. There is a statue of Kulczycki on a street also named after him. However, the whole culture of drinking coffee was itself widespread in the country in the second half of the 18th century. The first registered coffee house in Vienna was founded by an Armenian merchant named Johannes Theodat in 1685. 15 years later, 4 other Armenians owned coffee houses and had the privilege to serve coffee, though Charles II later tried to suppress the London coffee houses as places where the disaffected met, and spread scandalous reports concerning the conduct of His Majesty and his ministers. The public flocked to them. For several decades following the Restoration, the wits gathered around John Dryden at Will's Coffee House in Russell Street, Covent Garden. The coffee houses were great social levelers, open to all men and indifferent to social status, and as a result associated with equality and republicanism. More generally, coffee houses became meeting places where business could be carried on, news exchanged, and the London Gazette read. Lloyd's of London had its origins in a coffee house run by Edward Lloyd, where underwriters of ship insurance met to do business. By 1739, there were 551 coffee houses in London. Each attracted a particular clientele divided by occupation or attitude, such as Tories and Whigs, wits and stock jobbers, merchants and lawyers, booksellers and authors, men of fashion of the cits of the old city centre. According to one French visitor, Antoine François Prévost, coffee houses, where you have the right to read all the papers for and against the government, were the seats of English liberty. The banning of women from coffee houses was not universal, but does appear to have been common in Europe. In Germany, women frequented them, but in England and France they were banned. Emily du Châtelet purportedly wore drag to gain entrance to a coffee house in Paris. In a well-known engraving of a Parisian café of c. 1700, the gentlemen hang their hats on pegs and sit at long communal tables strewn with papers and writing implements. Coffee pots are ranged at an open fire, with a hanging cauldron of boiling water. The only woman present presides, separated in a canopied booth from which she serves coffee in tall cups. The traditional tale of the origins of the Viennese café begins with the mysterious sacks of green beans left behind when the Turks were defeated in the Battle of Vienna in 1683. All the sacks of coffee were granted to the victorious Polish King Jan III Sobieski, who in turn gave them to one of his officers, Jerzy Franciszek Kulczycki. Kulczycki began the first coffee house in Vienna with the hoard. However, it is now widely accepted that the first coffee house was actually opened by an Armenian merchant named Johannes Diodato. In London, coffee houses preceded the club of the mid-18th century European countries. In both Ireland and the United Kingdom, a café is similar to those in other European countries. While a café is more likely to be a greasy spoon-style eating place, serving mainly fried food, in particular breakfast dishes, which skimmed away some of the more aristocratic clientele. Jonathan's Coffee House in 1698 saw the listing of stock and commodity prices that evolved into the London Stock Exchange. Lloyd's Coffee House provided the venue for merchants and shippers to discuss insurance deals, leading to the establishment of Lloyd's of London Insurance Market, the Lloyd's Register Classification Society, and other related businesses. Auctions in sales rooms attached to coffee houses provided the start for the great auction houses of Sotheby's and Christie's. During the 18th century, the oldest extant coffee houses in Italy were established: Café Florian in Venice, Antico Café Greco in Rome, Café Pedroci in Padua, Café de Lucero in Pisa, and Café Fiorio in Turin. In Victorian England, the temperance movement set up coffee houses for the working classes as a place of relaxation free of alcohol, an alternative to the public house. In the 19th and 20th century, coffee houses were commonly meeting point for writers and artists across Europe. Current usage in most European countries, such as Austria, Denmark, Germany, Norway, Sweden, Portugal, and others. The term café means a restaurant primarily serving coffee as well as pastries such as cakes, tarts, pies, Danish pastries, or buns. Many cafés also serve light meals such as sandwiches. European cafés often have tables on the pavement as well as indoors. Some cafés also serve alcoholic beverages, particularly in southern Europe. In the Netherlands and Belgium, a café is the equivalent of a bar, and also sells alcoholic beverages. In the Netherlands, a coffeehouse serves coffee, while a coffee shop sells soft drugs and is generally not allowed to sell alcoholic beverages. In France, most cafés serve as lunch restaurants in the day, and bars in the evening. They generally do not have pastries except during mornings, where a croissant or pain au chocolate can be purchased with breakfast coffee. In Italy, cafés are similar to those found in France and known as bar. They typically serve a variety of espresso coffee, cakes and alcoholic drinks. Bars in city centers usually have different prices for consumption at the bar and consumption at a table. United States. Coffee shops in the United States arose from the espresso and pastry-centered Italian coffeehouses of the Italian-American immigrant communities in the major U.S. cities, notably New York City's Little Italy and Greenwich Village, Boston's North End, and San Francisco's North Beach. For the late 1950s onward, coffeehouses also served as a venue for entertainment, most commonly folk performers during the American folk music revival. This was likely due to the ease at accommodating in a small space a lone performer accompanying himself or herself with only a guitar. Both Greenwich Village and North Beach became major haunts of the Beats, who were highly identified with these coffee houses. As the youth culture of the 1960s evolved, non-Italians consciously copied these coffee houses. The political nature of much of 1960s folk music made the music a natural tie-in with coffee houses, with their association with political action. A number of well-known performers like Joan Baez and Bob Dylan began their careers performing in coffee houses. Blues singer Lightnin' Hopkins bemoaned his woman's inattentiveness to her domestic situation due to her overindulgence in coffeehouse socializing, in his 1969 song Coffeehouse Blues. Starting in 1967 with the opening of the historic Last Exit on Brooklyn Coffeehouse, Seattle became known for its thriving countercultural coffeehouse scene. The Starbucks chain later standardized and mainstreamed this espresso bar model. For the 1960s through the mid-1980s, churches and individuals in the United States used the coffeehouse concept for outreach. They were often storefronts and had names like the Lost Coin, The Gathering Place, Catacomb Chapel, and Jesus for You. Christian music was performed, coffee and food was provided, and Bible studies were convened as people of varying backgrounds gathered in a casual setting that was purposefully different than the traditional church. An out-of-print book, published by the ministry of David Wilkerson, titled A Coffeehouse Manual, served as a guide for Christian coffee houses, including a list of name suggestions for coffee houses. In general, prior to about 1990, true coffee houses were little known in most American cities, apart from those located on or near college campuses, or in districts associated with writers, artists, or the counterculture. During this time, the word coffee shop usually denoted family-style restaurants that served full meals, and of whose revenue coffee represented only a small portion. More recently, that usage of the word has waned, and now coffee shop often refers to a true coffee house format. Café may have an outdoor section with seats, tables and parasols. This is especially the case with European café. Café offer a more open public space compared to many of the traditional pubs they have replaced, which were more male-dominated with a focus on drinking alcohol. One of the original uses of the café as a place for information exchange and communication was reintroduced in the 1990s with the Internet Café, a hotspot. The spread of modern-style café to urban and rural areas went hand in hand with the rising use of mobile computers. Computers and Internet access in a contemporary-styled venue helped to create a youthful, modern place, compared to the traditional pubs or old-fashioned diners that they replaced. Variations. Middle East. In the Middle East, the coffee house serves as an important social gathering place for men. Men assemble in coffee houses to drink coffee and tea. In addition, men go there to listen to music, read books, play chess and backgammon, watch TV and enjoy other social activities around the Arab world and in Turkey. Hookah is traditionally served as well. Coffee houses in Egypt are colloquially called Hawa, HWA, which is the dialectal pronunciation of kahwa, also commonly served in Awara tea and herbal teas, especially the highly popular hibiscus blend. The first Hawa opened around the 1850s and were originally patronized mostly by older people, with youths frequenting but not always ordering. They were associated by the 1920s with clubs, Bursa and Gaza. In the early 20th century, some of them became crucial venues for political and social debates. Asia and China. An abundance of recently started domestic coffee house chains may be seen accommodating business people for conspicuous consumption, with coffee prices are sometimes even higher than in the West. In India, coffee culture has expanded in the past 20 years. Chains like Indian Coffee House, Café Coffee Day, Barista Lavazza have become very popular. Cafes are considered good venues to conduct office meetings and for friends to meet. In Malaysia and Singapore, traditional breakfast and coffee shops are called kopitiam. The word is a portmanteau of the Malay word for coffee and the Hokkien dialect word for shop. Menus typically feature simple offerings, a variety of foods based on egg, toast, and coconut jam, plus coffee, tea, and Milo, a malted chocolate drink which is extremely popular in Southeast Asia and Australasia, particularly Singapore and Malaysia. Singapore also has coffee shops known as cafés, and in the past few years, there has been a rise in café culture with urbanites seeking out specialty coffees, even with popular joints such as Starbucks and Coffee Bean. The millennials in particular sought for gourmet coffees as well as the relaxing and cozy ambience amidst the hustle and bustle of the city. Moreover, cafes have also changed the social scenes of Singapore. Instead of crowding at shopping malls, the youngsters could now hang out at cafes. In the Philippines, coffee shops chains like Starbucks became prevalent in upper and middle-class professionals, especially in Makati. However, carinderias also serve coffee alongside viands. Events such as Kapahan often officiated at bake shops and restaurants that also served coffee for breakfast and merienda. Oceania. In Australia, coffee shops are generally called café. Since the post-World War II influx of Italian immigrants introduced espresso coffee machines to Australia in the 1950s, there has been a steady rise in café culture. The past decade has seen a rapid rise in demand for locally roasted specialty coffee, particularly in Sydney and Melbourne, with the flat white remaining a popular coffee drink. Egypt and Ethiopia. In Cairo, the capital of Egypt, most cafés have shisha. Most Egyptians indulge in the habit of smoking shisha while hanging out at the café, watching a match, studying, or even sometimes finishing some work. In Addis Ababa, the capital of Ethiopia, independent coffee houses that struggled prior to 1991 have become popular with young professionals who do not have time for traditional coffee roasting at home. One establishment which has become well known is the Tomoka Coffee Shop, which opened in 1953. Espresso Bar. The espresso bar is a type of coffee house that specializes in coffee beverages made from espresso. Originating in Italy, the espresso bar has spread throughout the world in various forms. Prime examples that are internationally known are Starbucks Coffee, based in Seattle, Washington, U.S., and Costa Coffee, based in Dunstable, UK. Although the espresso bar exists in some forms throughout much of the world, the espresso bar is typically centered around a long counter with a high-yield espresso machine and a display case containing pastries and, occasionally, savory items such as sandwiches. In the traditional Italian bar, customers either order at the bar and consume the beverages standing, or, if they wish to sit down and be served, are usually charged a higher price. In some bars there is an additional charge for drinks served at an outside table. In other countries, especially the United States, seating areas for customers to relax and work are provided free of charge. Some espresso bars also sell coffee paraphernalia, candy, and even music. North American espresso bars were also at the forefront of widespread adoption of public Wi-Fi access points to provide internet services to people doing work on laptop computers on the premises. The offerings at the typical espresso bar are generally quite Italianate in inspiration. Biscotti, cannoli and pizzelle are a common traditional accompaniment to a cafe latte or cappuccino. Some upscale espresso bars even offer alcoholic beverages such as grappa and sambuca. Nevertheless, typical pastries are not always strictly Italianate, and common additions include scones, muffins, croissants, and even donuts. There is usually a large selection of teas as well, and the North American espresso bar culture is responsible for the popularization of the Indian spiced tea drink masala chai. Iced drinks are also popular in some countries, including both iced tea and iced coffee, as well as blended drinks such as Starbucks Frappuccino. A worker in an espresso bar is referred to as a barista. The barista is a skilled position that requires familiarity with the drinks being made, a reasonable facility with some rather esoteric equipment, as well as the usual customer service skills. Espresso bars in the United Kingdom, haunts for teenagers in particular. Italian-run espresso bars and the formica-top tables were a feature of 1950s Soho that provided a backdrop as well as a title for Cliff Richard's 1960 film Espresso Bongo. The first was the Mocha in Frith Street, opened by Gino Lollobrigida in 1953. With their exotic gadget coffee machine, Coke, Pepsi, weak frothy coffee and Sun Crush orange fountain, they spread to other urban centers during the 1960s, providing cheap, warm places for young people to congregate and an ambience far removed from the global coffee bar standard which would be established in the final decades of the century by chains such as Starbucks and Pret a Manger. The first coffee house in England was the Angel, which opened in Oxford in 1650. Image gallery.